Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. We're glad you could join us live for today's MAI webinar, Fiction from Life, with Cindy Coloma. 63 of you have registered from 20 countries. Wow. Thank you so much. This is a global event. Greetings from MAI. This is Ramon Rocha, the Director of Publishing Development from MAI. Hello, Mercy. Yes, our speaker is very gracious. She said you could ask questions anytime. So we'll entertain your questions even in the middle of her presentation. Please use the Q&A or the chat window for your questions. I'll turn off my video to save on bandwidth so you can see her presentation and Cindy. Writing fiction novels usually draw from the creative, inventive imagination, if you will, of the writer. But you could actually draw from your own personal real-life experiences, your own victories, your own challenges and struggles. Our speaker today will help us discover how our own life can be our very best writing resource. I first met Cindy at Lit World 2004, held in the Philippines. That was 15 years ago?
Yeah, a long time ago.
And if I'm not mistaken, Cindy met Nildon at that conference.
Yes.
And they eventually got married in 2007. So that is an accomplishment of Lit World.
It's a matchmaking.
And Cindy now has an interesting job title at Microsoft. She's the storyteller of the company. Wow. So she's
one of many. I'm not
not the only one.
No.
And Cindy has written and published 25 books, and several of them are bestsellers. So we're very happy and we're so privileged to have Cindy with us. Please welcome a good friend of MAI, best-selling author, Cindy Coloma.
Thank you, Ramon. And I'm really pleased to be here. And I'm just thrilled that there are people that you guys are from all around the world. Here in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, it is early morning. So I've been drinking lots of coffee this morning and hope you guys have some coffee or tea or whatever time of day it is, something to kind of settle back and talk about how fiction can really be enriched and developed through your own life. And so we're going to just dive in. So the three parts that we're going to talk about in this next hour are about the outer and our outer world and how real life really has an interplay within the fiction that we're writing. And then part two will be about the inner, our own writing life, and we're going to talk about just even your own writing style and things that can help with developing your fiction craft. And then part three will be bringing them together and seeing how those work well together. So we're going to start with the outer and the real life and the interplay with fiction. And there's so many different ways that real life interacts with the stories we're creating in a variety of ways. So first of all, just the structure of story comes from the structure of life. Every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And life is all about beginnings, middle, and ends. There may be abrupt endings. There may be awkward starts. There can be all sorts of different things within that, but every life has a beginning, middle, and end. And I think that's really why the structure of story resonates so deeply within us, because it is the pattern and the flow of all of life. The next, real life also does something else. It creates a lot of competition. And we exist in this fiction. When we're writing fiction, often we're wrapped into this imaginary world and creating a world, but we have this outside force called real life that is going to be creating competition as well as influencing and enriching. So I think it's really important to think about what keeps you from writing. What are those things that are distracting you? What obligations do you have? To really take an honest, true look at that. It's really easy for us to say, you know, oh, I'm just so busy, or I have this family, or I have this job. And those are real things. But with really looking at what those are, not only looking for where you can find writing time, it's also for you to look at the fact that your reader will be having those same influences when they're going to be reading your work. So what is keeping you from writing? And then what will then keep your reader from reading? And often those might even be two different things. So you need to know that look at what all the influences are in your life, but also really think about your reader. Who are they? Something that's distracting to me may be different from who my target audience is. It might be that if my demographic is an older demographic, what are those things that are competing for them? Health, or just their activities that are different from mine. I'm in a stage of having elementary age children, and I have grown children. So those are, you know, those are part of the competition, battling my writing time, but also work and just life. But then a reader may have something else. And then so using that knowledge to then think, okay, what length should I be writing? What kind of pace should I be writing? Does my reader really want to enjoy and savor long, beautiful paragraphs and stories that are really deeply developed? Or is my reader maybe a younger audience who they've got video games, they've got YouTube, they've got TV, they've got school sports. So how will my writing then compete against that? So keeping that in mind will really help with developing your writing. Then real life also provides enormous amounts of resources. And so often I would hear things when I started out in fiction. I've now written fiction and nonfiction and so many different things. But people would say, well, fiction's made up, or it's fiction's lies. You hear different things like that. But fiction is really all about stories and life, and there's these universal truths within that. And we find resources for that, and we make our writing more rich, more layered by looking at the resources of real life around us. Your experiences, your highlight reel, the worst and best, the most embarrassing moments you can put into your writing and make them funny, or make them sometimes get over difficult times, or help you through them, or be able to share something great through a character, something that you went through. Interviews are great, and I'm going to have a little guest expert come in a little bit to show just an example of that. But interviewing, everyone has a story. So anyone around you, just start listening and talking. It doesn't have to be a formal sit-down interview. Those are, you know, great as well. But look for experts. Talk to your family. Really, again, people you don't expect will have great insights and great stories that will enrich your fiction. Think of life themes, stories around you. Of course, on the news all the time are both depressing and once in a while, you know, encouraging stories that you can put into your book. History and culture always adds another layer. If you can weave in some history and culture in your setting or through the characters. Family stories, listen to your family stories, record them, save them for your own family, but also they really can give great ideas for your fiction. And then legends and myths, superstitions, things that are regional, they can add, elements of intrigue or mystery, or create conflict because of how different people believe or think. Really, stories are everywhere. And a couple examples I have here, I have my daughter, my oldest daughter, Maddie, and she was really an influence for my book, Ruby Unscripted. She, at the time, she was a teenager. She's now engaged and in her late 20s. But when I wrote Ruby Unscripted, the book isn't about Maddie, but the character is just very much influenced by her personality, her dreams. And I put this girl into a setting, and I would think through, it was really interesting for me to think through, how would Maddie react to this, or what would she do in this situation? And I was very clear to her, this isn't you, but you're influencing this, because I didn't want her to be like, is that what my mom thinks of me? Or I wouldn't have thought that. So we had a lot of communication about it, but it was really fun. And she really enjoyed having that book be about her and dedicated to her. And we did the book trailer with her as the actress. So it was really fun to bring real life into fiction. And then my below example, I was hired to write with Sheila Walsh. And what we did was we did 2 books together, and we took the nonfiction book that she had coming out that year, and they wanted a novel based on the themes. So we weren't going to make a nonfiction book be the actual novel, but the theme of that. So for this one, it was God Loves Broken People. And so when I went into working with Sheila on the development of her book, we sat and we brainstormed, and we created story ideas and character ideas, just to really show what that would look like in a character. And so the character discovers through the journey of the novel just how her brokenness and how God loves her. And so coming from then, that was more taking a theme and then weaving it in. But I'll talk later about how you have to be very careful with coming from theme, because you don't want to ever seem like you're preaching. Then real life influences genre. So really thinking about your genre, a lot of times you could say, well, I write supernatural fiction, fantasy, sci-fi. You can feel like this world around us won't have an influence on that, but it really does. You're going to still have, relational things happening in your book. You're going to have just the day-to-day that has to occur. There has to be the similar process. So thinking through, what is your genre, and then what ways can I take real life examples, going back to the slide before, how can I take these things, history and stories around me and life themes or interviews, and influence them specifically for the genre that you're writing. Now we're going to go through the inner and the writing life. And this I'm going to go through quickly, because I want to definitely leave time for questions. And again, if you have questions throughout, don't hesitate to type them in. But I feel like a lot of times we're told how to write. And we have, as we talked about, as we're looking at what our life is, busy lives, hectic lives. And so to discover your best writing method, to kind of work with that, is very, very helpful, because being able to have your best writing method is going to help you to write faster and better. So when I first started writing, I was told, this is how you write. You start with an outline, you do page after page after page of character developments, you outline, you sketch out, plot and conflict. You do all this prep work in advance. And that works for a lot of people. But for me, it really stifled the creative process. So I have an example here. I did a workshop for Microsoft, and on the side with the 3x5 cards, this is how I began. And it took me many years to get comfortable with the fact that my best writing method is not to start with an outline. And I have a good friend, Randy Inger Manson, who has written great things. He has a great blog. and talks about his snowflake method that he's developed, which has a spreadsheet where he goes and he has every scene in his novel outlined before he writes a word. Well, generally I start with, I'll have a sentence or a character or a scene or even just a short little description. And mine, I sometimes call the puzzle method because it comes in just pieces. And I've learned to just start, instead of feeling like I'm doing it wrong, to go, this is how best I write. And so a lot of times I'll start getting all these ideas and I'll write every idea I have and just brainstorm them out on 3x5 cards. Then I throw them on the floor. I start to organize them from there. And then on the other side, then I start getting much more detailed. And this was for a nonfiction, so I even do more detail and more outlining, whereas fiction, a lot of times I just start writing scenes and characters until I get probably a third to 1/4 to a third of writing. So maybe like 15,000 words, whatever feels good. And then I stop. I used to print it all out, and sometimes I just would have half a page written. But it was interesting that by just trusting that, I would find just how these pieces fit together, and that I wrote faster. I felt like I was more in the flow, that my creativity and the descriptions were richer in that way, because I followed what worked best for me. So you need to find and discover what works best for your writing method. If you really work well with an outline, or if you want to just dive in and create. And a lot of times I don't know the end of my books. There's a couple times I've had I didn't know how to solve a really major problem in my book. And I was really worried. The deadline was coming, and I'm like, I know how it would end eventually, but I didn't know how the climax would work out until as I was writing it, and I did a lot of praying, as I was writing it, it came to life. So it's more of a faith-based writing method. And so that may not work for you. But the thing is, find what works for you to be your best at writing. Now, in doing that, also your writing environment, what is best around you? Do you like to do brainstorming, like I said, with the 3x5 cards? Or do you like to get together with a group? My writing group was involved with Quills of Faith for years, and I'm still a faraway, distant member. We would sometimes get together and do brainstorming. And 1 second, I have my expert has just come along. This is Lily, and Lily is heading off to rock climbing and on a field trip, but she is part of my real life. And I was thinking how with rock climbing, you could have so many scenarios for fiction. Now, I've only gone rock climbing once, so I could consult my expert. You want to say hi?
Hi.
Hi, Lily.
I could consult my expert Lily on how to do belay or how to rappel down or all the things that she is doing and she's an expert at, and that she's able to make sure that my fiction, if I wanted to have a scene, a spy scene where there's an action scene in the mountains, or maybe there's a romance and they go rock climbing, or anything that I do genre-wise, if I want to include rock climbing because it's become part of our life, I get my expert to help me through that. And I would read it to her and make sure that it sounded authentic. So, do you have any words to say? You ready to go to rock climbing camp? Okay, yeah. I love you. Have a great time. Say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. Enjoy, Lily.
So even the little people can be your experts. So then again, back to create your creative environment. Do you like to be alone? I used to spend a weekend. A friend of mine had a vacation house in Mount Shasta, California. And it was really great to go up there young kids. I had 3 kids at the time, and I would go spend the weekend up there. I'd get food as I showed up. I'd pick up food. I'd go and I'd just stay the whole weekend. And I would get like 2 weeks of work done in the span of like two nights and 2.5 days. So that really worked for me. But then some people, that would drive them crazy. So really understanding, again, going back to your best writing method, what is your best and most creative environment? Do you like music in the background, or is it distracting? Or is there a certain type of music that is perfect for creating more creativity and imagination? I sometimes really love to have a movie playing in the background, but I can't be one that I'm like, have never seen before. So for some reason, The Bourne Identity is one of these movies that I can just have in the background. Also the Lord of the Rings series, Harry Potter, different movies that I enjoy and are creative to me, but they aren't distracting. Then do you need no interruptions? You need big chunks of times, butt in chair. That comes from my friend Anne DeGraff, who some of you at Lit World know. She would say you got to keep it in that chair. And sometimes I've even said I cannot get another cup of coffee until I get 500 more words. Do you like a messy environment, or do you need to get it clean? Those are things to really think about when you're doing it. Now, my warning here is do not let method or environment turn into procrastination tools. Don't spend the entire day cleaning your office because you like a clean environment, but then you never get to writing. Don't let that video distract you. Don't head off to Starbucks and then you end up chatting. Don't go to one where you're going to see people or with the coffee house or tea house or wherever, if you like to go and work in a cafe. So again, it's really about knowing yourself. The next would be your writing strengths and weaknesses. And all of us have strengths. And I feel like with writing, it's often really attached to your personality. So if you're really someone who's this wealth of knowledge, or you have just this really great charisma, you may be more of a peacemaker, or you're always thinking about future things and you're kind of this futurist, you're into technology, and that's a real interest of yours. These can really be your writing strengths, and to leverage those and think about those and say, okay, how can I use my strengths within my fiction? Then with that, you also have your weaknesses. And it might be something simple as poor in skills. And something about your weaknesses is I really rarely see that they're about your personality. Your strengths are very attached to your personality. Your weaknesses are usually something, they might be a little bit similar to who you are, but it's often something you can really work on and overcome. So being aware of what they are gives you that opportunity to address them and figure them out and go, how can I improve grammar? For years, I thought I was terrible at grammar and punctuation, and I was. And so I always kept telling myself I was, even as I was really working to improve it. And then after a while, I realized I wasn't really that bad. I just kept saying I was bad at it. And I had grown and learned more than I had even realized, and because I focused on it. But really thinking about, what are you hearing when people read your writing? Do you get a little boring? Do you get wordy? Are you lacking clarity? Pay attention to the feedback you get. Set your work aside. Come back to it. Read it with fresh eyes and honest eyes. And then start really paying attention to where you need to grow. So then when you have your strengths and your weaknesses, you are able to kind of create your own writing profile where you can see what your strengths and weaknesses are and leverage your strengths and improve your weaknesses. So again, I went back too far. There we are. So knowing yourself creates better impact and better productivity. And your best writing self will be able to do your best fiction. Now, I'm throwing this in just because it's early morning and I want to make sure people are awake. that I'm still awake. But I just love this little cartoon, and it's his brain saying, hey, I know you're just about to fall asleep, but let me flood you with all these amazing ideas. Now, I don't know about you, this happens to so many writers right as we're falling asleep or in the shower or driving in a car is when all the great ideas come. And so always have your notepad, your pen nearby. If you're driving, don't use notepad and pen, please. But you can, I use sometimes my record on my phone. So I'll just do audio for thoughts, or I'll pull over and jot them down as fast as I can. I've always thought that an invention of a whiteboard in the shower to write ideas would be a huge hit, but I've never invented that, so maybe one of you will. But capture those ideas. There's a lot of neuroscience around different brain waves and when you're most creative, and a lot of it is in this time of where you're between rest and sleep, when you're meditating, praying, that a lot of times when you're praying, you get great ideas, or meditating, just try when you can to really grab those ideas, because so often those are your crisp, amazing descriptions is when during those times.
Lorraine raised her hand. I don't know if she has a question. Do you have a question, Lorraine? You can chat. You can use the chat to ask your question. By the way, the ideas, in my case, Cindy, it's when I'm about to wake up, or those ideas would flood my mind. You know, you're half asleep, it's already 5:30, you're beginning to wake up, and the ideas would just flood in.
Yeah. That's so you should be capturing them. Yeah. Because a lot of times that time of day, I'm already like, oh, I need to do this. Oh, I forgot that. But for you, if that's your best time, that's a great time to have that pen and paper next to you.
Okay. Let's continue.
Okay. So let's bring some of this together. But first, I want to bring in fiction and real life. Some of the things to really keep in mind, some of our fiction essentials are to remember that you are creating a fictive dream. You're creating this world that it doesn't fully exist in this world, in real life. So you're creating something that must feel like it is real, that it is this place they enter that feels like it could actually exist. If there's any time that people are like, what? That wouldn't happen, or I've been to that location and that's not at all where that exists. I remember years ago I was reading a novel and it was set down in a part of California that they talked about they could see Mount Shasta. And I was like, what? That's like so many hundreds of miles. There's no way you can see Mount Shasta. So it pulled me out of the story and made me lose confidence in the author because I was pulled out of the fictive dream. So you have to be really careful, and we're all going to make mistakes. So it can be difficult at times, but to be perfect. So we try to be perfect when it comes to creating this world, and you can really, as you grow in your craft, you'll get better and better at this. Then the next is progression of story. So often when I would do editing, there would be times where people would create a chapter or a scene because they liked a town, or they liked the history, or they just wanted to have these two characters interacting, but it didn't actually move the story along. So if you pulled it out, it wouldn't mess with the flow. So make sure that every scene is necessary. And sometimes what you can do is make it necessary. So if you loved the scene you wrote, but an editor or someone, or you realize, oh, this doesn't actually move the story forward, this doesn't add something new, this doesn't build towards the climax, make it so that it does. If the easiest is during mysteries, if you're writing mysteries or any sort of detective novel, you can always add like some new clue or drop a hint or something that's going to move the story forward. Just make sure it actually works with the overall story. Don't just, throw something in. And then always keep in mind your audience. Always feel like you're speaking to someone, that you're sharing something. A story is never complete until it is shared with the end person. And so we can sometimes get lost in what we're doing and forget that somebody's going to be reading this, and how best, again, going back to earlier, how best will this come to them? How will I keep them engaged? How do I grab them from what all that competition of real life? And then keep in mind your genre. Stay with, some genres have a formula you need to work with, or they need certain key things. And then there's others that are, you might be more literary, where you need to create this much more literary world. So always know your genre really well. And then story truths. When I was reviewing this last night, I was like, why did I put story truths? And then I was like, I have no idea. And then I thought, I'm going to leave it in, and tomorrow maybe I'll remember it. But after some sleep, I did think of, there's truths in life that you want to weave in. And so really make sure that questions you have about life are in there. Always more questions than answers are really great with fiction for your reader to help and uncover new truths that sometimes I've had people come back and say, I loved this theme that you wove into the book. And I hadn't intentionally put that theme in there. So sometimes story truths just come through without you realizing it, but just keep an open wonder and curiosity to discover those.
Before you continue, Cindy, Lorraine is asking, how do you stop being your own worst critic? It keeps us from writing.
That's a tough one. We will always be our own worst critic. And I think you have to think about the end. Like, is this really something that you're driven to do? Do you want to write? And if you want to, try to shut off the critic and just write. You can edit and edit and edit all you want after, but if that inner critic is stopping you from getting the story out, then you're never going to get anywhere. And I write in a total disaster. And I've always had this fear up until a lot of times when I had a contract, I thought, what if I die? And they say, okay, let's get the manuscript that she was working on and let's see where she's at. And I've always had this fear they're going to be like, oh, she's such a hack. Somebody else wrote those other books because this is horrible. I have definitely learned to shut off the critic, get the story out there. It can be a mess. The writing can be horrible. Don't go back and just edit and edit and edit first chapters until just try to get as much as you can. Again, it goes to who you are as a writer, your writing method. Some people do need to write a chapter, then the next day go back and edit. That's worked for a lot of famous writers as well. So find that process. But if you're being kept, your inner critic is keeping you from writing, telling you you're a terrible writer, don't let it. Every writer feels that. I've been writing for 25 to 30 years and I still feel it. There's still sometimes I'm like, can I even write anymore? And I have to turn it off. I have to say, look back, or feel like there has to be something that keeps you going and just ignore it, because sometimes you can't fully turn it off, but ignore it and go forward.
Thank you. There's a tip from Coletta here. Hi, Coletta. Coletta says she's using Evernote. It has a record feature that you could record your ideas that come when I'm too sleepy to write, she said. So that's a tip from Coletta. Thank you. And thank you, Laura.
Yeah. Evernote is a wonderful tool. Yeah. It's great for clipping online resources or anything. That's a great resource.
Yes.
So let's look at some of the do's of writing, just to, and you know, that we could do this class, we could do a workshop for hours on how to write fiction, but that's not what we're doing today. But I wanted to really still bring up some of the important fiction tips through this. But you're going to want to weave in powerful themes, universal human needs, traits in your characters' lives. Now, the key is to weave them in. Do not hit your reader over the head with these big themes. You know, just put questions into your characters, put thoughts, have little conversations. But again, keep the story moving. You can get really hung up on some of these. Then make your settings come alive by using descriptions of actual cuisines, landscapes, use the five senses. If you go to a great event and take the descriptions of those, you go to a location, museums, all of those can give you great details to make those small details, not big, long sections, but just weaving in small little details like of what people are eating can really make a location come to life. Do be a story hunter. Look for stories and ideas everywhere. And let your characters surprise you. It's interesting how with fiction, characters really, they should come to life for you, and they should do things that are unexpected. And that again goes back to just letting go and kind of having faith in the story process, and that we all inwardly have just a natural understanding of story because it is part of life. And so as you're creating characters, if suddenly a character seems to kind of, wow, this character wasn't going to do this, but seems to want to, really follow those and look for where creativity can take you. Then some don'ts. So again, don't overwhelm your story with long sections of description. Weave in description. Now, if you're writing literary fiction, you're going to have more description, more beautiful sections, but literary fiction is the rarity. For any sort of dramatic, romance, mystery, children's books, YA, you're going to want to really weave in the descriptions and not have big sections of it, big long paragraphs or pages like you would have in literary fiction. Then don't forget to make it believable. Sometimes real life isn't believable on the page. So if, let's say you have someone read your fiction and come back and say, this didn't feel believable to me. And you say, well, that really happened. And I can tell you the whole story. Sometimes real life is so beyond fiction. You're like, no one would even believe this. So really pay attention to that. Even if it did happen in real life, if it doesn't feel authentic, if it feels too much of a coincidence, or if it feels too much of manufactured by the author, it again is going to pull the reader from your fictive dream. And then a big don't preach, don't do your social justice issues, your soapbox, do not put that into fiction. Now you can weave important messages through your characters, the plot, the conflict. If there's some social issue that's really important to you and you want to include that in your fiction, absolutely. Just make sure you're not beating the reader over the head. Anytime the reader feels like the author is turning to them and saying, I want you to get this point, it's just like your mom telling you as a kid, go clean your room. You don't want to hear it. But when a character encounters something great and their life is changed and it feels authentic, the reader's going to get that. Really trust that your reader is intelligent, and even children can capture this. Children understand when they're being preached at. Let it come through the plot and the conflict and the stories. And I just can't say this enough. You can even have a preacher in your book, but if the reader suddenly goes, okay, this preacher is on the pulpit preaching, they will know that you're trying to get this very overt message across. Do not do overt messages in fiction. weave them in, and they become so much deeper and interior when your reader is kind of wrestling through it with your character or through the plot and discover these messages that are important to you. So again, don't forget the reader or audience. Now, don't write about everything. Now, sometimes we feel like the things that we go through in our life should be great for writing. And as writers, often it'll be like, oh, this thing happened to me, I need to write about it. And sometimes it's just not what you're supposed to do. So sometimes it may not be time either. And I've, some of the things that I've gone through in my life, I will probably never write about because it just doesn't feel even though I went through it, and you could say, well, I went through this hard thing, I could help others, I could share how I overcame. If you feel that strongly on your heart, absolutely. Be sure though that you're ready. Don't go through a tragedy and the next year be trying to write about it. And I've met a lot of people who are doing it. You can write about it, and writing can really be therapeutic. But don't feel like you're trying to get it published or out there, I'm going to change someone's life for it, because you haven't gone through the journey fully. So write it down, capture it, but don't be ready to publish or put it out there until you really have gone through. And a lot of times it's helpful to ask a mentor or trusted friends to read it and help you along that journey. Now, here's just a little snapshot of my life. I have my 5 kids up here. These are my 5 babies that aren't all babies anymore. My family, I'm married, Neilden, my Filipino husband, my Filipino family, which includes a lot of Filipino food, which thankfully I really love. When I'm not trying to diet, because you cannot eat a little if you go to a Filipino fiesta. As my Filipino, those of you that are on the call know, Ramon among them.
Yes. Sure.
And then just some of my activities: hiking with my son, going to a baseball game. So just as you're working on this, create snapshots of your life. I could fill this up so much more. I wanted to. I could have spent hours adding to this. Last night, I'm like, oh, I got to put my parents and I got to do that. So I had to stop. But as an exercise after this, hopefully today, write about yourself. Really just brainstorm, take whatever time you have. If you have 10 minutes, if you have an hour, however long you have, just do a super intense brainstorming session. Write about everything you can think of: your family, your heritage, where you're at. We have such a great diverse group right here with things that we wouldn't know about each other. And bringing that to life in your fiction just reaches somebody else in a different way. Don't just use the basic stereotypes of your location. Get deeper into your region and share what the culture and heritage is like. Also your activities, hobbies, your pet peeves, what really bugs you. You can throw that in with a character, and it's really fun to have pet peeves and things that have happened to you that you can have with your characters. Also, I've found it lately, I've been writing out some of my very favorite books and movies and the type of humor I like, music, different genres, and then to really question, why do I love these? What about this list of movies and that captures me? What are something like, I love The Princess Bride, but I also love The Shawshank Redemption. But what is it? It's because there's some moment of wonder. I always love moments of wonder, but also some humor. And so really start looking at what you love and start thinking, maybe that's what I should be writing, because it's going to be something I'm really good at, because those are the things that I naturally am attracted to. Write out your dreams, your beliefs, your faith, what your superstitions are that maybe we don't even want people to know, your passions, and your secret dreams. And I put dreams and secret dreams because they're different. We often have these secret things that we're even too embarrassed to admit to ourselves. So write some of those out and create this profile and see how that can really enrich your fiction. So your job is to create worlds that no one wants to leave, not you and not your reader. So in doing that, it really comes to life by all of those exercises of your real life. Now, one of my favorite examples of someone who's just a master is C.S. Lewis. And one of my favorite scenes in all of his books is in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And the scene, and in our workshop in Singapore, I read this whole scene, but I've added other content to this workshop, so I'm not going to read this, but I'll tell you about the scene. So this boy, Eustace, he is just such an annoying boy. He's just does everything he can to create problems. He's mean, he's cruel. And on this island, he gets turned into a dragon. And you can see the image of him here as a dragon. And he had put this gold cuff around, he found this treasure. And he puts this gold cuff around his arm and he falls asleep and he wakes up this dragon. And he doesn't know what to do. And he's in pain. And he's really faced with the dragon inside of him that he's become. He's outwardly become what he has been inwardly. And he can't get this scaly skin off of him. And then Aslan the lion comes to him. And it is Aslan who is able to tear away the scaly skin and the dragon that he has become. And I really recommend you go and read this. I believe it's chapter 7 of The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, where Eustace talks about just how Aslan takes his claws and just puts them deep into his heart and just tears away the skin deeper than he thought was possible. And just the description is so rich. And it's really, we never get any sort of preaching or theme or C.S. Lewis saying, I want you to know that this scene is about transformation. It's about redemption. And it's a Christian theme of Christ coming and salvation. But C.S. Lewis doesn't create it like that. He doesn't tell you that. And someone who isn't a Christian wouldn't know that C.S. Lewis had become a Christian and this was an underlying theme. But anyone, you don't have to be a Christian to recognize what this moment of when something transforms you, or when you see yourself, your ugliest self, and you get a second chance, or you get a moment of redemption and transformation. And it's just so well done. There's no preaching. It's a perfect example of how we can create something, a real life truth within this children's book. And it's this powerful, powerful scene. And I highly recommend you go do it and ask yourselves these questions. What isn't said? And what do you feel? And how does it connect to the reader? What are things it reminds you of? And just really asking, so can any genre convey powerful themes and truths? And I say definitely yes. So when you're reading and you're struck by a moment that captures you and you love it, or you love a sentence, pausing and really asking questions will help then influence your own fiction writing. Definitely go read this. It's probably my favorite scene of any book. I go back to it again and again. So now we're going to have some questions and answers before we close. Mm-hmm. And I would love to hear from you. And then I'm also going to pop up here just some of my contact information too.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Wow.
For having me.
Yeah, you have given us a lot of insights and ideas. Sally is asking, along with C.S. Lewis, who are your favorite writers?
Oh, I have so many. um, well, if we're talking fiction, I love C.S. Lewis, Tolkien. Uh, Chaim Potok is really great. My Name is Asher Lev is his book, and it's one that I really enjoy as it's about an Orthodox Jewish boy being raised in an Orthodox Jewish environment who has this amazing artistic talent. He's like a prodigy. And he really has to wrestle between this faith he's being raised in and the faith he has and his art. And I thought it's so well done. And that there's another one, My Name is Asher Lev, and then there's a follow-up very similar. So that's an excellent book. I always my mind always goes blank if I'm like looking over at my books. A Prayer for Owen Meany is another favorite that pops into my mind. I'm reading a lot of kids' books, so there's a lot there. I really love, I love mysteries. I try to really vary it with classics to what's kind of really popular right now. The book that won a Pulitzer a couple years ago. The Shining. I will have to send it to you. But that's a wonderful book, and I cannot remember the author or the name. All the Light You Cannot See. Yes, All the Light You Cannot See is a great book, and it won the Pulitzer probably 3-4 years ago. And I sometimes just open that book and read a page because the writing is just amazing.
Thank you. Maybe we can send them this list of books that are your favorites.
Yeah, then I could ask them.
Thank you for that question, Sally. Jenna is asking, have you ever been afraid of hurting someone's feelings when you use real-life details in your fiction?
Well, the funny thing about that is I really try to never use one person as a character. I'll try to weave in other things. But the interesting part is I've had people in my family and friends say oh, I know that person was me. And I'm a little horrified because I'm like, no, it wasn't. There might be pieces. And so I think I don't want to hurt people. And there are writers who say, oh, you've got to tell the truth. You should always tell the truth no matter who it harms. I don't believe that. People who are writing memoirs, I think you have to be really careful. Is your story greater than harming someone in your family? So I think it has to be really considered. But with fiction, you shouldn't ever, I don't think, model exactly if it's possibly going to hurt someone's feelings. So if you can weave it in different ways, or change gender, or change complete location if you want to do that, I think then you kind of get away with not hurting someone's feelings. Because I'm a person who really cares about people's feelings. So I wouldn't be able to just press on through that.
Thank you. And Jenna has a follow-up question. Are you currently working on any fiction now? Tell us about it.
Yeah, I'm starting to, Jenna. I've been working at Microsoft for almost getting close to a year, and that has drained a lot of my brain because it's very different. I'm learning things I never have, and having to write them has been challenging and exciting. But it's been difficult to find the time to write, that real life competition. But I've been starting to piece together new ideas. And so, yes, I'm going to be coming back to fiction at long last. It's been a long, long time since I had any of my books. And hopefully my first 3 books will be coming out next year as a relaunch for the 20-year anniversary, with some follow-up books as well.
Sally is asking, of all your books, is there any one that is your favorite? They're
like my kids. No. I don't have a favorite kid. They think I do. It's really funny. They all think they're my favorite. And I'm like, well, that's good. But they all were a different time in my life. So there's a meaning there. Although I would say the collaborations where I was hired to write a book, those wouldn't necessarily be among my favorite. Among the collaborations, I would say on the screen, these three are probably, I shouldn't say this because then I think of poor Bud. I'm sorry, Bud. but the books about sex trafficking, which is nonfiction, and then The Waiting, what is just a beautiful book about a woman, this is a true story, and she was 102 years old when we were working on the story, and it's about her being reunited with her baby, and that actually is the photo she saved for 70 something years before they were reunited, and those are her hands. And then Deep Undercover is the story. Jack Barsky is a former KGB spy who is now an American citizen, a Christian, and a huge American patriot. So his book was amazing. But fiction-wise, they're like my kids. I don't have a favorite.
Thank you. Joanne from Johannesburg is saying that All the Light is also her favorite.
Oh, good. Yes,
Yeah.
I highly recommend it. It's a beautiful, haunting story, and it's told, the main characters are in their are older children it's during World War II, and it's set in France and Germany, and so the perspective, there's a lot of innocence through the perspective in a time of war. It's an amazing book.
Joanne is asking, what is your own writing routine?
My own writing routine is, well, I'm working on that, because it's funny, I used to do a lot of writing coaching, and I would give all this advice, and now I'm at the point of I need to give myself that advice. But when I go to Microsoft, I have a 3-hour commute on those 3 to 4 days a week, an hour and a half there, an hour and a half back. So a lot of times when I get home and I've got Lily and then her little brother Griffin and my husband, I'm tired. So I'm trying to come back to, I used to always really try to start early in the morning and even just write 500 words. And that 500 words would keep a progression. And then also a lot of times you end up writing more, but at least to hit that. So that's what I'm trying to initiate again, is to get up before I have to go to work, or even at lunch, at my lunch break, to go into a quiet area and do that for at least 500 words. So I'm getting my writing routine back, because I write all day. I mean, I'm doing a lot of writing at work, but it's not my creative and it's not my fiction. Mm-hmm. So thanks for the question. You're kind of nudging me back, back to it.
Yes. Thank you. Any more questions from our audience, from our participants? Yeah.
I don't know how this
well, these are all very helpful, Cindy. Yeah, we're about to close, but I know you've talked about many tips and ideas. What are your parting words?
I would say, as you go out into life, just really be curious. Always be curious. Ask questions. It may not seem like it, but I am more of an introvert. So it takes effort for me to always ask people questions or follow through. But just always have your ear out there. Be that story hunter. Listen more than you talk. Listen to people's stories. Let them talk. And sometimes being silent brings more stories. And then also just really let your always be imagining. And kind of my key word that I feel like has become mine is wonder. So I'm always trying to seek wonder, find it in nature, in my meditations, my prayer time, in what I'm reading. and then to seek that wonder, but then also find ways that I can share it. So I would say curiosity, be listening, just let your imagination flourish, seek wonder, and then in sharing it, just keep working at your craft, be excellent at your craft. You will, that's how you will build your readership. You don't have to do, platform and all that. Social media is what it is. But if you are excellent and always growing your craft and sharing those wonders through a great craft, you're gonna do awesome.
Thank you. Very inspirational, said Joanne. And Coletta, has been a fantastic webinar. Thank you for your encouraging words. Well, thank you so much. Again, thank you, Cindy, for taking this time to share your experience, share insights, share tips, share really the keywords that you've mentioned towards the end. Those are really very good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
thanks. Yeah.
Get out there writing. Get to work. 500 words.
Yes. Yes, 500 words a day.
Well, it's not very much, but that starts you at least, or before you leave in the morning.
Yes. Okay, so thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for being with us.
Thank you. I didn't have to call my mom to ask her to be on here because you guys showed up.
Let me just take this opportunity to invite our friends in the African continent. There is going to be a Lit Africa 2019. It's a continent-wide training conference for African Christian writers, editors, publishers, booksellers, designers, script writers, and more on November 5 to 7 in Accra, Ghana. Please visit the MAI's website, litworld.org, for more details. So our friends from Africa, I hope to see you there in Ghana in November. So thank you very much. The Lord bless all of you. Thank you again, Cindy. Thank you, Sally. Okay, goodbye for now.